chat section, there was a question specifically for Megan, and there was a question in Q&A for David. I think David's came first. So, David, I don't know, you answered one. Did you answer both of them?
There were two. There was a really good question about the Taylor's checker spot, which is a critically endangered butterfly that is on Denman Island. Its range was much larger. It's a unique, well, they're all unique. Every species is unique. It's an interesting story. It's a subspecies. So the species itself is regarded as globally secure. The subspecies at this point is largely limited to Campbell River, Denman area. The spot on Denman, there's been a lot of effort to try and preserve this thing, but it's almost an accidental save in that there was a cleared forest, and the butterfly took residence in that cleared forest. So were it not arguably for the cleared forest, it probably wouldn't be there anymore. Now, I don't know how many folks are listening are familiar, but there's a great online participation utility called iNaturalist, and I started using that last spring. I've caught up to, well, I'm in the #2 spot now, but the person in #1 spot's been doing this for a lot longer, so they're out of reach. But she has a picture she just that she uploaded that she's has from the 1980s, where she spotted this thing on Hornby on Helliwell. Anyhow, it's an interesting story. I didn't include it as a unique to the Gulf Islands situation, partly because it's subspecies, but also because the range that the official range actually goes to Calgary. So it's an interesting, you know, it's always a how does Solomon cut the baby here? So that's not truly unique to the Gulf Islands, but the Gulf Islands activity is the biggest one in terms of saving it right now. And it's also a great example, and the reason I like this example, you can't look at the big number at the top. You got to go down to each species and say, what is it that we need to do for this one? In this case, they either need to recover the Gary Oak savanna, or they had the accidental clear cut, and that's not a finding out that sometimes humans need to do something as opposed to no, leave all the trees growing. Each species is different, and having a broad brush universal, like, you know, you can't do this or you have to do that. The world is a lot more subtle and complicated.
Yeah, and actually, David, that would bring us straight on to the next question from Mike Best, which is the Gary Oak actually threatened by the CDF?
Well, absolutely, and it probably isn't much of a stretch, and that's why GERD exists. To the Gary Oak ecosystems, or portion of the Douglas fir is the greatest diversity portion and the most at risk. And the fact that we haven't burned, because we stopped First Nations from burning for 150 years, is really the primary cause for the endangerment or threat to that forest is colonists saying stop burning. So that's our fault, and it's not necessarily anything else. It's been identified that is the #1 problem, and so you gotta go back and start doing prescribed burning, which Parks Canada is doing, or start thinning, cutting out trees.
Okay, gee, thanks very much, David. Yeah, great questions. So let's go back to the chat section. There was a question from Megan.
I just wonder if we can, we've got Dick Varney standing by, sure. And I don't know if you can upgrade him to speaker or whatever, but I'll just introduce Dick.
I've just added Dick in. I assume it's the right.
There was a question from John Money.
Yeah, I know, but we're going to put
Dick. Yeah. John, so let's run through who's next. So Dick is next. then we should have Megan answer the question that came up in the chat earlier, and then John Money. For the moment, that's the running order. Okay. Yep,
so Dick, some of you may have seen Dick's letter that Shelley found in the 500-page agenda package for the November trust meeting. I would just want to say that Shelley does invaluable research for this sort of thing and posts on our site a lot. He's a registered professional forester with long-time experience in the forestry industry, and he's joining us from Lasqueti Island tonight. So Dick, you had a few comments that you wanted to share. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I've been doing a lot of research on the pre-1850s forest and the coastal Douglas fir for about 20 years off the side of my desk. I actually am not a registered professional forester anymore. I'm retired, so you can't use my advice as a professional anymore. But I'm still knowledgeable, and I wrote a CDF and fire blog for the Lasqueti website, and that's probably the best source of my information. I can send you a PDF file of that because on the website the charts did not format at all. So let's see, what else? So, you know, I really looked at a lot of different things. It was mixed fire intensity for wildfires, native burning, fire intervals, First Nation populations and practices, epidemics, the forest's possible mix of ages and species, tree density options, climate history for about the last 350 years, mainly for droughts, tree quality, site series, understory growth, different fire intensities, and how all this interreacts. So a lot of people think forestry is pretty simple, but it actually can be pretty complex. This led me to reconsider, and I think the natural disturbance type in the coastal Douglas fir is not NDT. The natural disturbance type, which is NDT, is not NDT2 with the fire return of about 200 years as per the Biodiversity Handbook of 1995, which is sort of the Bible. But NDT4, which is with an actual subunit, which is a fire return of every 6 to 40 years, say low and mix of intensity fires, and occasional high intensity stand replacing fires. I believe this increases the fire potential risk on our forests greatly because we've had 100 years of fire suppression. I have some more about thinning, but thinning and forest health is really a complex issue. It's well over an hour's discussion or more. It is more, what are your long-term goals for your property? What are your goals usually? Your goals usually direct your actions. Thinning does provide many benefits. You know, not the least, if you're interested in carbon storage, it lowers the fire risk and therefore increases the sustainability of any of that carbon you're trying to save. And there's a lot of other, you know, benefits to thinning. So that's it. And I can put up my the how to find that blog on the Lasqueti site in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. If you would do that. Oh, go ahead, Mary Beth. Yeah.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, we're back into questions. Yeah.
Okay, so some great questions being posed and answered live. So now I think the outstanding one, Megan, there was one earlier asked during your did you? No, it was earlier than the ORL one. Thank you for the answer about lobbying. And there was one just before that, which was, yes, Megan, can good forestry be regulated? The main issue is with the IT that they believe it can and will produce their desired results. Take the Galiano Development Permit Area, DPA regulation, which exempts total deforestation, removing tree cover forever, while at the same time the DPA then tries to regulate sustainable forestry without an understanding of forests and its people. Is this good forest stewardship? That seems like a big question, but over to you, Megan.
Well, I think that was Dick's question, wasn't it?
Okay, yeah. That's why we have you here. You think it's been answered already? Okay.
Well, no, I think, Dick, that was your question, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I will tell you, I think some of the most smartest, intelligent people, if they do it correctly, reside in writing, drafting policy and regulations. So I think it's a bit of a loaded question, but I would say it's a fine balance, and you can have regulations that do consider that balance, and especially if you're using professionals that are using the right experience and expertise. Where I find it very problematic is where you have people trying to push the governance without the accountability or maybe the educational background or the consideration for what things do need to be considered by private landowners. I find that extremely worrisome about where that can go. And I don't think, I'll say this again, especially in light of climate change, I don't think our black and white thinking around just, well, how the media will portray it is that we just lock things up is going to be our answer. While fuel loads increase and, there's drought, increased summer drought, which is well known on records, which we're seeing on the coast of BC. I don't think that very simplistic thinking, like Dick said, forestry is very complicated. And one thing that would work very well, and I have brought this up, I've phoned the directors around CDF and suggested that they have other representation in their group for consideration of these values and how complex, and maybe active management is the way that we go about this, active monitoring and management, not just thinking that we're going to lock up areas and that's going to be our best solution. There's a lot of complexity there. We're running on projections around how weather is changing, but I really feel it's a big mistake to not incentivize the stakeholders. And like I'll say again, we've seen this throughout the world where private landowners have been incentivized, and it's worked very well. And there's ways to do it. I can give you an example. There's examples in the States where there's things like tax breaks for doing certain activity because there is so much private land in the United States compared to British Columbia. And then there's ways of not doing it properly. And that becomes a real problem.
Do you have any of those examples on your website, Megan?
We don't, but we've done some comprehensive literature searches and gone through. Some of our colleagues in the States, the American Forestry Association has some really good examples.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of examples. Yeah. If
you shared those with us, we could put them out on by email and by Facebook. That would be really helpful, I think.
Basically, it comes down to all sorts of things. Any public values that intersect with private land. There's different ways to incentivize it, whether it's access.
But it would be great to see those concrete examples, because it is difficult when you're in the situation we're in, where you're trying to hold back something. And, a good way forward is perhaps to say, there are all of these alternatives, and that would be terrific information to have. If you could share it with us, it would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I think we go to John Money. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. And I think we have one more hand up from Howie Kiefer. Yeah.
Okay. So John, I'm asking you to unmute now. Hi, John. John Money. There you go. Go ahead, John.
I was really, some of the presentations tonight were very fulfilling. And one of the things I'd like to say is that your time lapse of the Gulf Islands, which is quite interesting. And what would be very dramatic is if you could see a time lapse from, let's say, 40s, 50s, 60s up till now. And all of the stuff you're looking at that you know, that people are talking about and want to protect was severely logged back in those periods of time. And everything you're looking at there is regen. And if you had the time lapse all the way up, you'd see how wonderful the Gulf Islands are at regenerating themselves and the forest coming back. And in many, many, many of those old logging cases, there was no replanting done. It was, you know, wire logged and burned. And the other thing I would like to say, I was very impressed with Megan's presentation, and I think that I would love it if they could come and manage the Parks Canada properties. Parks Canada, in my opinion, and quite a few of some of these properties that are just held with conservancies, are loving them to death. They're not looking after them. There's huge buildups of fuel, and the properties are not regenerating properly at all because they're not being cleaned up and not looked after. And I'm very concerned about those properties because I can see them really degenerating. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. That was really helpful. Interesting. So the next person who has her hand up is Bowie Kiefer. I'm just asking you to unmute now, Bowie. Go ahead. And then we have David Haley.
I am now unmuted.
Yep.
I live on Galiano Island. I'm a forest owner. I'm also involved with a new society that we have here called the Galiano Ecoforestry Association. Looking at the time-lapse photos that you showed of the Gulf Islands, what happened with Galiano was at the beginning of that period, there were extensive clear cuts through the forest. And now there are no clear cuts. The entire forest is green. And the only not bright deep green area is agricultural land. But when you get down on the ground, you find that much of the forest is actually in very bad shape from the point of view of fire hazard, because it's been neglected, and the owners, who are largely city folk, are subject to disincentives that the Islands Trust won't let them live on their property without jumping through extraordinarily high hoops, or giving their land away. And as a result, we've had a deadlock for 30 years, which is pretty damn foolish. And the island has turned totally green, but is sadly neglected. And so I think the Islands Trust actually needs to realize that we all share the same environmental ethic, that all the Gulf Island people want the forest to be beautiful. Nobody wants to destroy it. But not all of us who own the land actually know how to do it. So we need education. The trust hasn't been doing that. The trust is a police agency. It has a bunch of town planners who pay their taxes and buy their groceries in Victoria. These guys don't know anything about forestry, and they don't trust landowners to look after their land without intensive regulation and oppression. So we need to move towards really mobilizing people and having a collective movement of forest owners getting together with the Forest Service workers and create some jobs and look after the woods really well, reduce the fire hazard, and by all means improve the biodiversity, and burn a few Douglas firs that are too close to the Gary Oaks. And the Islands Trust should be happy with that, but they don't need to oppress us in order to make things better. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was so well said. I think you pulled together and said a lot of things that other people think, and you did it very well. Thank you. Do you have a website or anything for your Ecoforestry Association?
We will have. We've only been running
Sure.
a few months. And,
Okay, great.
But I would love to get the distribution list from this meeting and the email list, and I'll send some information to everybody.
Perfect. Well, if you send me, just be in touch with us via that info at, I think I put that out there. I'll put it out again. The info for all our voices. If you get in touch via that, we can talk about how to help you.
I'm also very much involved with our Galiano Trail Society, which is partnering with our forestry group. And so this is promoting public recreational access and basically having forest land, which is producing economic value through harvesting, but also is functioning as basically privately owned parkland, indistinguishable from publicly owned parkland, except that the private land is better looked after. And we have a trail society in Galiano, which is confederated with the trail societies on Salt Spring, Gabriola, Saturna, Maine, and Pender. And it's called the Gulf Islands Trail Society. Maybe we need a forest association extending from the private forest landowners, but working on across these islands to stir up more positive activity, to do things.
Yeah, to manage those treed forested areas and use them as a facility at the same time. It would be, I think what Megan said, indeed, it's like an incentivized holistic approach rather than come in with a big hammer to crack a very small nut. Yeah, thanks, David. That was really good and positive. Go on.
One last thing is that some of us have been living there for going on 30 years, and we've got some areas of the island which we have been restoring and trying to reduce the fuel load. And of course, you're dealing with retired Douglas fir industrial plantations, so you've got a lot of work to do if you want to look after it. And we've been doing this in some areas, and the public can walk through the trails. So people on the island are aware that good things are happening in some areas, and the neighboring landowners are now coming on board to do the same thing on their land. So we're trying to sort of spread a demonstration forest outward from a few pilot areas across the whole territory.
That's really great to hear. It's nice to hear such a good, positive story, David. Thank you so much.
That was Bowie, but can I just interject? I've seen what he's talking about with his photos, and maybe that would be helpful to put it up on the social media if Bowie, if you were interested in that, because I think those visuals that you're talking about right now and actually seeing the before and after of the work that's going on and how you've added value and, brought back ecosystem function in conjunction with other values, I think that would be very poignant to put up.
I'd be delighted to do that. It's quite striking when you go to, like my land, I've got 170 acres of coastal Douglas fir, in which most of the cedar trees have died because of the changing climate. And the arbutus trees are dying because the Douglas firs are choking them out. But what we're doing is we're working on it. And some of it's about 70 years old, and the trees are coming along really well. The forest has shaken itself out, and it's getting better and better. And other areas are about 30 years old. And when you've got those young plantation forests, they really need work. And if they've been neglected for 30 years, it's not good. And so when you go in one of those areas and you do a cleanup on it, it's amazing how it's transformed in terms of the visuals that you were mentioning, Megan.
Gee, I have a burning desire to go to Galiano now to see this stuff.
You're all welcome. You can.
Yeah. I love your vision. Actually, when you said the forest has shaken itself out, it just created a great picture in my head of the forest sort of, shrugging its shoulders or something and coming back to life. It sounds really, really pretty wonderful. And it's lovely.
If we did no work at all on the woods and we were lucky enough to avoid a very intense forest fire, then the forest will shake itself out. But it'll take a long time to do it, and the diversity will be very limited unless we do intervene and do some opening up and do some planting of different species and really look after it. And the amazing thing is that if you're a private landowner and you do this, your land is much more attractive for your own enjoyment. And if you're mercenary, it's also more valuable if you want to sell it. So
Yeah.
you're adding to the value of the Gulf Islands by looking after the woods.
Thank you so much. I can't think of anything to say that would be better than the things you've just said. So I'm going to hand back to Mary Beth. Is there anything?
We've got David Haley waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
because
You're
they-
still,
they-
yeah, go ahead.
Can't see
David.
it, but they flipped around on the screen and then we got confused. So David, are you ready? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to make 3 comments that supported the points that Megan made. And just by way of background, I am a professional forester. I am a PFLA member, but not in, and my property is on Vancouver Island, not on the Gulf Islands. I'm also a member of the Coastal Douglas Fir Partnership, Conservation Partnership. But the 3 points I really want to support is the first, to get some of Bowie's visuals up. I think that would be quite valuable. The second one is to support the concept or the idea of active management. I think for various reasons, fire being one of the main ones, we definitely need some active management. And then thirdly, I really want to stress that the Islands Trust has a tax incentive within their mandate right now. It's called the Natural Area Protection Tax and Exemption Program. In my opinion, it's been very ineffective. But when I read the report from the Environmental Law Center out of UVic, I was concerned that they really didn't put much emphasis on improving the NAPTAP program. And this is something that the Islands Trust has totally within their mandate. They don't have to go to the province. They don't have to do any lobbying. They could design it so that they provide advice or extension services to the landowners. They could provide assistance in terms of fuel management. They could change the financial reward that's given to private landowners that conserve their lands. So I find that going for a tree bylaw is, in my opinion, quite backwards when they have tools already available that would achieve what they want and be much more positive. So thank you.
David, you said NAPTEC. I know what the TE is, tax exemption. What's the rest of it?
Natural Area Protection Tax Incentive Tax Exemption Program.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I mean, it's been in existence for, I don't know, 10 years or more. And the landowner gets a tax break. But the hurdles required to get that tax break are fairly significant. I just find it frustrating, though, that they could remove those barriers and achieve the goals that they ostensibly are setting out to achieve, rather than trying to bring in a new regulation or a new bylaw.
Thanks, David. David, is that NAPTEC thing particular to the Islands Trust, or is it a tool that's available? It's particular to the Islands Trust.
It is particular to the Islands Trust.
Okay. We should take a look. I do find it rather curious that, like, the whole dynamic of why we're doing these things, to me, has shifted, in that in the past, you know, you were talking about tax breaks and incentives to, you know, support industry. But there are reasons to kind of erode the tax base, as maybe some people would say, that go beyond, you know, or move into environmental areas. And instead of that, they just bring in regulations. So I really, really think that, you know, incentives work so much better. And I just, thanks, David, and thank you, Bowie, both of your, you know, the contributions you've made has been really helpful and kind of uplifting, because it's very hard to, you can end up down in a rut thinking there's no way out of this. So it's really helpful to hear from both of you. Thank you so much.
I don't have a specific reference, but I know that there have been studies, I think out of Australia, but also out of the University of British Columbia around this tax shifting. The conclusions tend to be that the actual shifting of taxes from a landowner that conserves their property onto the remaining residents, say, of Pender Island, is a very small magnitude, you know, pennies or dollars per year.
Okay, thank you.
And so you've got all sorts of reasons, wetlands and well, wetlands being a big one, to provide conservation actions.
And the good thing about doing it in this way is you probably need less bylaw compliance officers. So that's a save.
Yes.
So I think, David, you have another question. David Dennison, over to you.
Yeah, really appreciate both Bowie and David's insights. I look forward to going back to Galiano, and well, in fact, first I want to see the pictures. But in terms of NAPTEP, I was just on the conservatory side. I think there's only 22 landowners that have used it at this point. And it's a challenge. I know other jurisdictions have allowed people to carve off part of their property, make that a park, even in some places where, say, 4 neighbors have gotten together and they donate the inner corners of their property so somebody else can get there. So it's a shared park really between 4 people. But with real estate in BC is, you know, drives our economy, fortunately or unfortunately. Fortunately, if you just sold and made a bunch of money and you can move somewhere else. The problem with covenants, I'm sure, has been a damper on NAPTEP, in that that's a significant encumbrance on your property, and you don't know, what you're going to do in the future. So, but I'm not trying to discourage it. I really like David's points about, what else could you do here in terms of consulting, resources, what have you, for these properties. And I see he's put his hand back up, so I look forward to the comment.
Yeah, I was just actually trying to Google up NAPTEP to see if I could find anything quickly to share. Go ahead, David Haley, as opposed to David Dennison. If you want to respond, that would be fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and I take your point that putting a covenant on a piece of property can be a barrier. I was sort of expressing some frustration, like I say, just that they have a tool there. They're not. And exactly. I looked at the numbers, and yeah, it's, I don't know, what is 20 landowners, and I think it's a couple hundred acres or something like that. So to my way of thinking, that's, I mean, sure, something is better than nothing, but in terms of the program trying to be effective and efficient, that it's not achieving its goals. I guess to build off of that comment, though, I think there's other tools out there that are such as allowing density transfer between properties, can address some of your concerns around loss of, real estate potential, that sort of stuff. So I guess just in conclusion, I think there's a bunch of stuff that could be there. Megan's referenced some, and I just find it frustrating that the knee-jerk reaction is, well, let's bring in a bylaw.
Yeah, And to me, like in normal business conditions, if you only had a very poor uptake on this, it would be like a key performance indicator that would perhaps cause you to question whether you shouldn't review the program and the incentives because they're not working. So it is kind of interesting that it just sits there, kind of, it's very elaborate, but it's moribund. And then they reach for the tool of last resort, as Mary Beth would regard it, which is regulation. So anyway,
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say, okay. All these regulations that, transfer of density or what banking, these are highly complex regulatory tools. Okay, but just, and I also read something that apparently it's beyond, it's sort of beyond, the staff in some ways. They're very complex. But what's broken? Like, didn't we decide that, like, that's what I'm struggling with. Like, we're looking for, are we trying to stop people from cutting trees, or preserving, like what, like, why are we trying to solve this when we're doing okay, aren't we? And we all love our trees, like, and a few little sites are getting patch cleared, right? Yeah?
Right.
I think they have a disproportionately large emotional effect on people when they happen.
I know.
But you're right.
We don't live by emotions. Our world, if we lived by emotions, it would be a different world. So if it's true that all those facts are true, and for me, I started out, oh my God, I read a few things. We've got to save every tree. I feel anxious every time you hear the chainsaw go. Sorry, Jamie and Ben. But, I was getting into that whole thing. I was getting sold. And now I look at, and I felt sorry for Salt Spring when I looked at that time lapse because it has so much disturbance. But now I'm looking at it completely differently, that Salt Spring is, in fact, with all that disturbance, fireproofing itself. The ecosystem is not in danger. Why are we, can we just step back and look into housing, something and do some things that we haven't gotten done yet that need to be done? I don't know.
Deer. Can we deal with deer?
Yeah, the deer and the feral goats. And on
Yes.
that note, I'm just going to throw the question out there. Someplace or other on Facebook, somebody brought up the fact that, okay, we have deer, and on Saturna we have feral goats, but some other island had something like feral sheep or something, I thought, but I can't find it. Okay, David Dennison, you can answer this question, and then we're going to,
except Juanita, there's another question from, yeah. And maybe
Juanita.
Bowie. Is Bowie's hand up again? I don't know. There's Juanita.
Okay, Juanita, go ahead. And you need to unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
She's good.
Juanita, yeah.
Hi, I'm just a landowner, ordinary 1 acre landowner on Pender Island next door to Mary Beth. And I found it very educational, everything I've heard tonight, and I've sat in on quite a few different presentations now. So which one has to become an expert, an amateur expert about so many different things to do with this draft trust policy. So, so it's a huge learning curve. And I know that people who are speaking tonight, a lot of you already know quite a bit. So partly you're all speaking the same language. Well, that's not my language. So I'm trying to get my mind around a lot of this information and absorb it. So what I keep coming back to at the end of each one of these presentations, including even the fire safety one that I watched, which wasn't part of this program, but like, now what? So I've been told all of this information. Now what am I going to do with it? And what are we going to do with it? I see there's 25 attendees or something on here tonight. What about all the other people? I have friends who live on Saturna who have no idea about they're into environmentalism. They just say, oh yeah, the trust policy is great because it's protecting the environment. So there's no depth. Is anybody looking into any of the issues with any depth? So how are we going to educate more people? What are we going to where does it go from here? You know, at some point, like how are we going to move?
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to take December off. Most people will. And then very important for the next step is to engage in the public engagement. And that will be the next push. A lot of people have been reached out to, and we had talked about this even during the summer, that there's a variety of different groups. The Salt Spring group, there's another Pender group. We're all now coordinating. And we're also finding that people are starting to do what we're doing, which is, factual deep dive into information and breaking it down. Now, the next step is really to make delegations to Trust Council and so engage in the public engagement, write letters to Islands 2050, and then request. We intend. The reason we started with David's easy question on the extent of the coastal Douglas fir, which is kind of a no-brainer that they got it wrong. The second step is this whole idea that it's very possible. In fact, I think it's for sure, because I've been working with David, that the coastal Douglas fir issue has to be discarded. The way it's described with all these, it's precious, it's unique, it's at risk. All of that has to be gone back to 2008 and start again from the Madrona study. It's all over the whole southern Vancouver Island. It's in Nanaimo. All the wording, that same wording, misinformation.
I did hear today, I don't know the facts about it, but somebody said that they believe they heard at the Trust meeting that the public engagement consultancy contractor had been chosen. So it would be good to hear. I expect there'll be some kind of news release shortly, but I agree with Mary Beth that that's a huge opportunity to actually, really get people involved and to get people to actually really full on engage with those guys and tell them what you really, really think. Don't miss that opportunity. And, we did kind of think that once that contract company was chosen and the ink was dry on the paper that they had to sign, that we could ask them, challenge them to come to a webinar like this. And in January, as they kick off, just come and meet us in this kind of forum and explain what they're planning to do. So I think that public engagement is really important. And then there's this governance review going on, and the outcome from the governance review is supposed to be published in, I think it's March. And so that's another big key step. At the moment, yesterday, they're discussing the budget, and I did make a presentation pointing out to them that the last survey they did last February, 71% of the people wanted no increase, which seemed to have escaped them. So I'm not sure whether that'll influence the discussions going on at the moment. So I think there's a building, a lot of pressure on the Trust to review their practices and do better than they have been. And they don't get a free ride anymore like that. They can, for instance, yesterday in the budget, there was 41,000 for a study on sustainable, watershed sustainability or something. And there was a motion to put it back into the budget, which is like 12 to 16% increased. And that was defeated. So there may be a sort of sense of reality setting in around some trustees who are beginning to realize that, business as usual, just, they're beginning to get a sort of a sense of the constraints that are around and what people really want from them. I live in hope. So I think if these guys are happy to go on, I suppose anybody can leave whenever they want to leave, and I haven't locked the doors. So if anybody feels like, okay, I've had enough, fine, and we'll just go ahead. There's another couple of questions from I think I said to Dick that he was next. And then there's Bowie wants to come back again as well. So Dick, go ahead.
Oh, just a point that it's Lasqueti Island that has the feral sheep. And
That's it.
they do a pretty good job on the south end along with the deer. Or the
Okay.
east end of the island.
So then it's goats, sheep, and deer.
Yep.
Yep, we
Okay.
had all three at one time. I don't know what's happened to the goats.
Well, we've got two. So okay, Bowie, back to you. Thanks very much, Dick.
Well, the topic of covenants came up, and so I thought I would share a horror story with you. And Galiano Island does have a few horror stories in its forest zone. And this one is that the bylaws provide that you may not have a house live in a house on your forest land unless it's at least 50 acres. And if you have also signed a covenant with a trust and with an approved private society to hold a rather intricate covenant. And the intricate covenant actually says what we're going to do anyway, which is our harvesting is going to be selective. We're not going to create great big openings in the woods, and we're going to have a slow rotation. So because we want the forest to be beautiful. And the horror story, you can't have a house if your property is less. The only way you can get a house if your property is less than 50 acres is to give 3/4 of it away, and then you're allowed to keep 5-acre parcels. And for every 15 acres you give away for parkland. So you're removing land from forestry and creating parkland, which is one thing to do, but it's not necessarily very fair. And what happened was there's a couple of guys who are presently living in Greece, and they have an international travel business, and they were knocked totally flat by COVID. The pandemic destroyed their business, and they have an application they've had an application into the trust for several years to be rezoned so they can have a house on their 50-acre parcel. And everything's fine. They said they didn't object to the covenant, even though it's far too many words in it. But the problem was the trust said, well, you've got to go with this covenant holder who actually helped us write the bylaws some years ago. And it happens that they want $10,000 up front to hold your covenant. It doesn't cost anything to monitor the fact that you're not clear cutting your property. Those satellite photos show where clear cuts are happening, and there's no need to pay anybody $10,000 as a ransom so you can live in a house. And what they did was they put a gun to these guys' head several months ago, and they said, if you don't have a covenant by about 6 weeks ago, we are going to kill your file, and you'll have to start again from the beginning with another $4,000 of rezoning cost. And the association which wanted to hold the covenant said, you've got to pay us $10,000. We can't budge on that. We need that upfront payment. Which, if all the forest owners in Galiano went along with, that would be something like a $750,000 nest egg. And these guys are friends of mine, and we're working with them on restoring their forest land. And we came up with an idea. Says, oh, we've got this new forest association. We can hold a covenant, and it doesn't cost anything for our volunteer association, which is guiding these people on forestry to watch what they're doing in a friendly way. There's no cost. So we went to the trust and we said, here's the covenant, and our names are Galiano Ecoforestry Society is holding the covenant, and it's identical to the covenant that you want, even though it's got too many words in it. And what the trust did, they refused it. And they killed these guys' application, and they're thrown out into limbo, and they can't live on their property unless they start again with another $4,000 application and $10,000 for that society, or else they build a house illegally, which is what, of course, they should do.
That's dreadful. That's a terrible story. I don't know. Does anybody have any ideas about how we could tackle things like that, or how those things can be?
Some of the guys on Galiano are just a few guys, and forest owners are saying, well, actually, what we need on this island to solve everything is some mutual movement toward really good hands-on energetic forestry and done very well, opening up trails and so forth in the forest land. All of this is good for everybody. And the forest owners could do that, and the trust needs to get off this ridiculous thing. You can't live in your 50-acre parcel or your 20-acre parcel. They just have to let people live unconditionally on their property. And the thought was, well, some of the boys might say to the trust, we'll do a voluntary covenant because we're not going to clear cut. So we'll have a covenant that on one page that says we're going to do, our intentions are towards sustainable forestry, everything along the lines of the Managed Forest Council, with the addition that openings won't be bigger than, say, half hectare. And that kind of thing is fairly harmless, but the other route of extortion and then asking the provincial government for more powers when in fact they are misaligned with they are in violation of the provincial private managed forest land act, which says one of the allowed uses of a forest parcel in the program is a house, because they want forest owners look after their land if they live on it, even better than if they don't.
Yeah.
And there are a large number of parcels on Galiano which are managed forest, and where the Islands Trust in its wisdom says, well, we know more than the provincial government does about what's right, and it's not right to have a house in this unless these guys sign the covenant, give the 10,000 bucks to our friends, and or else they give away 3/4 of their land if they don't have 50 acres. So the Islands Trust has got to, before they seek any additional powers, they've got to get their house in order, because this is really, this thing on Galiano has been very destructive. And it's easy to solve it by a little bit of constructive, positive, mutual movement, but we're not quite there.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in, just what Bowie said there with the Ministry of Forests. There's a staff of over 4,500 employees that work in the Ministry of Forests, and this program falls, the act and program fall within this ministry. So you can imagine, I would guess, just a rough guesstimate, that half of those are registered professionals, at least within the staff. So, you know, I that's why I'll be a big proponent of pushing for having consistent management across the province with those professionals. Even if you have diverse ecosystems, you have consistent management and the expertise to do it properly, not things at the municipal or another level like Islands Trust, where you may not even have professionals on staff, and the go-to is just to lock it up. And like, I don't think that's going to play out very well for us over the next couple of decades, when we see what happened with mountain pine beetle spreading around the province and the after effects of that, and then dead timber on the landscape, and then we're getting other climate change events that are leading to big wildfires. Like, these are complicated discussions, and we need to have, almost like Bowie was saying, like round tables and really innovative thinking on how to manage and monitor and adapt, not just think that black or white, lock it up, or if you don't lock it up, you're bad. We really need to really think about how to resolve some of these issues, or, like, knock on wood, it won't happen, but with drought levels happening, like, while, you know, and heat domes coming in with lightning strikes, when we have these big fire events, over 75% of them are caused by lightning strikes. They're not caused by humans. So I would completely agree with Bowie. It's problematic. And if we start seeing more of these pushes around some of these values, like CDF just sort of seeding themselves in the Gulf Islands, it's not a very good way to manage. I stand strongly behind that.
Do we have one more? Dick, did you have your hand up again? He's probably, is he muted?
Oh, he might have put his hand.
No, it's oh no, it's off. It's off now. Okay.
It's gone. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Bowie, I find it so, I'm so sorry for your friends and the difficulties and how stressful that is for everybody involved. And I'm just surprised that we don't know more about it in general. Maybe everybody else does. I know that there's a kind of a Galiano type issue, but not the specifics of this case. And I don't know how could we help you in any way? And if you feel there's anything we could do, just send an email to us. I don't know whether we could help you to write it up or somehow, you know, get the storyline out there, because I just find it incredible that you should have to deal with this kind of stuff. It seems terrible. Go ahead.
I think the best thing we can do is all of us work on all the Gulf Islands to do the best possible job on forestry, with attention to providing the maximum community benefits, like recreational trails, and the maximum benefits in terms of employment and prosperity for young people. And the more we do a good job, the better it's going to be. And we just have to mobilize. And I think it's important that we inform people. I'm trying to work in a very friendly basis with the Islands Trust, and with some of the groups that are the conservancy type people that have been very intensely on one side of this war. And I'm trying to move to the middle so that we actually change the subject, move laterally instead of banging heads together, and change the subject toward improving the forest and improving the trails and making the island happier and more prosperous. And if we did it on all the islands together, that might be a way of helping us.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks, Bowie, and I'm looking forward to seeing the photos and to hearing more about your efforts. It sounds amazing. So do you think we've drawn to a close, Mary Beth? Yeah? Yes. So,
I do. I just didn't understand what was going on. You're breaking up a bit. I just didn't understand what was going. Have we covered everybody? Dan O'Donnell came up, and David is up again. But are we okay? David's muted. David Haley.
Yeah.
Oh, there's David.
Sorry, I guess 2 points. One builds on a little bit on what Bowie was talking about in terms of providing benefits to the islanders. There's a group on Vancouver Island, part of the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance, that's looking at how to increase utilization of fiber. And I think if you combine that with fuel management, that could be an avenue to provide employment and a product. So I think that could be a positive. The second point, I guess, is I'll take a little bit issue with David's comments earlier about the CDF zone. Yeah, we know it goes down into the States, but we don't have any ability to do anything down there. So I guess maybe I'm being a little biased, but I'm not sure that focusing on the fact that the CDF could be considered not at risk is I think that might be a bit of a red herring. I think there's other more positive things to be looked at in terms of, you know, fuel management, watershed management, drought resilience, recruitment of old growth, species at risk habitat, all sorts of stuff. And I'd hate to see it just get bogged down on numbers.
Yeah, it's the CDF is really just a step in the way, and it's so embedded. It's being pushed at us all the time. So it's just a step that we're going at. I do see John Money's got his hand up again. Right.
okay,
You want to
John.
upgrade him?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
And he's muted. Yeah.
Can
There
you
we go.
hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just really quick, David Haley was quite interested about the trust does have tools already, and I was quite involved with them and myself with getting the tax break for natural area protection, and a lot of work was spent on that, and it could work quite well. And also, you were talking, Mary Beth was talking that, you know, that density transfer and all that was very complicated. If you read the Saturna Island bylaws, you'll see that we've already dealt with density transfer, and it's laid out quite well how you can do it and use it. And it works on Saturna. And also our forest phone works quite well. And so if you're a policy person, read some of that stuff and you'll see that it's pretty much all thought out already. And David's quite right. They have a lot of tools, and tree cutting bylaws would not be a good tool. It would be an abused tool, and it wouldn't do the job at all, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, John. David, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you want to respond to David Haley's comment on the...
John.
Yeah, I actually think that.
Oh, that David. Okay, sorry.
David and I are in far more alignment than in any sort of argument. So I appreciate what he's saying there. I agree. I think fundamentally the whole constraint of the CDF zone, and let's argue about how super unusual or how small it is just irrelevant. And do we really care about what's outside our walls? And that's why we all bought here, why we all live here. I mean, we do care about it. And there's we got to get down to the real issues. Get all this nonsense out of the way and get to the real issues.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I see David's got his hand up.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention that one of the electoral areas of the regional district in Nanaimo also has a bylaw in place dealing with the density transfer. So it's not a totally new concept, and work has been done on it. So I suspect it could be brought into place if there's enough political will. Thanks.
Okay.
And John Money wanting to respond to that.
No, he didn't lower his hand.
Oh, okay.
After
Okay,
the last
sorry.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
So, guys,
You're going to get out?
Thanks.
Time to get out.
Okay, everybody, thanks so much. I think the fact that we still have so many people hanging in there is a tribute to people's fortitude, but also the depth of interest in this subject. And we've had some great speakers, but then the discussion and the questions have really thrown other perspectives and lights on everything, and it's been terrific. So I really appreciate everybody who's been here, and thank you. And we'll share the recordings and we'll share the transcript of the questions, etc., through the usual means over the next day or so. So thank you and good night from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.